Good evening, I'm Kelly Wright. Thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate you watching us for the next hour, and I sincerely hope that wherever you are, that you are safe and well and taking care of yourself and each other. Let me get right to it. Here are my opening observations. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. They're household names now because of the horrible and outrageous events that led to their deaths. How long must this go on? How long must we hear a Black man cry out, "I can't breathe"? When will all of us who are Black and brown in America be seen as Americans entitled to equal rights, just as white citizens are? America in 2020 continues to break the heart of Black Americans. For 400 years, we've been in this country, and we've helped build this country into a great nation. For 400 years, we have fought, bled, and died on the battlefields that America has fought. And we still find it hard to be accepted as citizens who are equal to all. For 400 years, we've labored, not in vain, but to be a part of the American dream. So why does this keep happening? The great writer and civil rights activist James Baldwin once stated this: "We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist." He went on to add, "I can't believe what you say because I see what you do." There is a wrong that's going on in America racially, and we must learn that a nation divided cannot stand. And those are my opening observations. So my first guest on the show to actually talk about what's going on in our country as it relates to the violence that we've seen inflicted on unarmed Black men and women is civil rights attorney Ben Crump and one of his colleagues and partners, Mark Harris. And gentlemen, it's good for both of you to join us today as we weigh in on these issues that have galvanized our attention. But for those of us who are African-American men, women, and children, it has not only galvanized our attention, it's caused us to some degree have some dread and fear about what it means to walk around while Black. And so Attorney Crump, I'd like to start with you, Ben. This entire case that you've seen over and over and over again, the most recent one being George Floyd there in Minneapolis. Let's start there and what you're doing to represent the family.
Yes, our firm, the Ben Crump Law Firm, represents the family of George Floyd. And as Mark and I have often discussed, Kelly, it really is open season killings on unarmed people of color, especially Black men, by the very individuals who are supposed to protect and serve all of us. Whether it's George Floyd, whether it's Ahmaud Arbery, whether it's Breonna Taylor, who was executed in her own apartment, it seems to be this legalized genocide killings of Black people, which is the title of my book, Open Season, Legalized Genocide of Colored People, that talks about how the laws that are supposed to protect us are being used to kill us. And you see that in George Floyd. Without the video, the police had literally, Kelly, came out and said that he died of some medical condition and never once mentioned that the police officer had his knee on his neck for 9 minutes, not 1 minute, not 2 minutes, not 3 minutes, not 4 minutes, not 5 minutes, not 6 minutes, not 7 minutes, not 8 minutes, but 9 minutes. And I do that in every interview for the dramatic effect so people can understand that this was a tragic, senseless death. When you think about the fact that for 9 minutes, this man begged and pleaded for help to say, "Take your knee off my neck, I can't breathe." Mark, even the citizens started telling the police, who are supposed to be the professionals, who are supposed to de-escalate a situation, Kelly, that Mark and I all talk about in the courtrooms all the time.
Mhm.
But instead of de-escalating it, seemed like they escalated while the people were trying to de-escalate their actions on causing this man to die at the hands of this brutal, I believe, excessive lethal force that can only be defined in my mind, Mark, as murder.
You know, many people have said that, Ben and Mark, at the same thing holds
Yes.
true, that some attorneys have looked at this, some people have looked at that, and even the people who were trying to intervene on George Floyd's behalf, saying, "Officer, get off his neck." They even said, "You're killing that man. He's dying right in front of us." Uh, Mark and Ben, do you think any charges should be brought against these men? Should they be indicted?
Absolutely, but I'll defer to my learned partner to espouse on that.
You know, it's funny. One of the reasons I'm proud to be affiliated with Ben Crump is because of his courage. Ben Crump calls it the way he sees it. He tells truth. He speaks truth to power. And I've heard him in interviews, my dear colleague throughout the country, talking about this being murder. Murder is the taking of a human life without justification, typically with premeditation and deliberation. That is exactly what happened here. That is exactly. The fact that there was not only one officer with his knee on his neck, Mr. Floyd was clearly subdued. He was constrained, but you had a semicircle of officers who aided and abetted. This is about as textbook a situation of an inappropriate homicide, an inappropriate taking of a human life of anything I've ever seen law enforcement engaged in.
I'm talking to Mark Harris and attorney Ben Crump, both attorneys with the Ben Crump law firm. And we're talking about George Floyd, but there are a whole lot of other cases to talk about as well as the fact that it does, as Ben has rightly pointed out, it seems to be an open season, the legalized genocide of men and women of color. We're going to come back with much more. Ben Crump, as well as Mark Harris, stay with us right after this break. Welcome back to the program. So I'm talking today with attorneys Ben Crump and his partner, attorney Mark Harris. Now, we've been talking about the George Floyd case and how outrageous it was. And Ben, the governor of that state of Minnesota, even stated that this was inhuman. Where was the humanity as that officer continued to keep his knee on the neck of George Floyd? And then you have the former Senator Amy Klobuchar talking about the inhumanity of this. And then you also had the situation of the mayor stating very clearly, you should not have a death sentence because you walk around being Black. And so Ben, what's the family doing right now? What do they want out of this? Because clearly justice is part of it, but it doesn't bring George Floyd back.
You're absolutely right. Nothing will bring him back, and nothing will erase this horrible memory of watching their loved one die. I know I was on an interview with his youngest sister, Bridget, and she just literally broke down that she tried to departmentalize the person who used to protect her was killed, and there was nobody to protect him. And so when I think about Senator Klobuchar reaching out to the family, if you're an elected leader who has any morals, Kelly, I don't see how you don't reach out. Even President Trump today said that it was sad. He that's all he would commit to. He wouldn't say that the police officers were wrong for what they did, but he at least said that it was sad, and he said that they hope to get answers soon from the Department of Justice on the killing. So, whereas Martin knows, Kelly, that it's not common, but every now and then a situation can be so egregious, like the Walter Scott killing in South Carolina, where you can have two parallel prosecutions going on simultaneously, where you have the state prosecuting and then you have the federal government prosecuting. That's the same situation we have going on in Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia as well. And it is our hope that they would do a similar parallel prosecution in the case of George Floyd, because it is certainly warranted that we look at this case not only for the state murder charges, but also the due process violations that happen where, I mean, people, you're talking about denying somebody medical attention where it was reasonably necessary. The public is telling you, you're gonna kill them. All they had to do was take their knee off his neck. And George Floyd will still be here today, but you're right, Kelly. They didn't even offer him that degree of humanity, the right to breathe.
And showed no remorse at all, even when he was being picked up and placed on the gurney by the paramedics. Mark, I'm really saddened by all of this, because this is just an extension of more cases that we've seen that Ben is now representing. My thoughts are, how do we move forward? Because we can't move forward until this is addressed. And Ben, you were talking about it earlier, the de-escalation, and that's what the police should have done. Instead, the public was trying to de-escalate the police. And I find that you can train a police officer, but if the police officer is not wired in with morality and integrity and just respect for human rights, we have these problems.
Let me take a second and debunk a couple of things I know with the support of my colleague, Attorney Crump. One of the things I find interesting is this is a city that has an African-American police chief. Sacramento has an African-American police chief, and Attorney Crump represented Stephon Clark's family, a victim of police violence here in Sacramento, despite having an African-American police chief. One of the first things we have to do is to speak truth to power and to make sure that we hold people accountable. The way that law enforcement officers are selected, the way they're screened, is to be tough guys and women, to be, if you will, the bouncer in the club. It's not to de-escalate anything. So part of this is going to have to be a matter of really selecting officers who have a predisposition for de-escalation. That's the first thing I think that needs to happen.
You know, words matter, and words have power. If you could advise the president on issues like this, where we see racial violence going on, what would be your advice to the president of the United States in terms of dealing with crisis situations like this, and showing some compassion, as well as putting words out there that heal, as opposed to what some would perceive as words that divide, and actually give a pass to situations like this?
But when I think about our leadership in America today, you really have to question the morality more than anything else, because when Mark and I and my law partners around the country, when we go in the courtroom, we quite literally ask jurors when we're doing jury selection, do you believe Thomas Jefferson's words? Do you believe in the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths that all men are created equally, that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that amongst them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And sometimes I get in trouble because the judge is telling me to move on, but I'm asking each one of those jurors, do you really believe that this black man who was shot and killed by this police officer is equal of consideration as the police officer? And if they won't commit to that, then Kelly, we've already lost before we begin the fight, because they have to at least recognize our humanity as equal human beings as they are. I don't believe some people within the criminal justice system and the legal system value Black lives as being equal to theirs.
That's right.
And therefore, they don't see that we have the right in the benefit of the United States Constitution as American citizens. And so that's our ongoing struggle. When you talk about why this keep happening in America, because they think that we are here for their benefit. That and Ahmaud Arbery, that when we confront you, you must submit to our will. You must obey us. With the police, I'm sure, with George Floyd, I don't see it anywhere in the video, but Kelly, I can bet you they were trying to say, well, he wouldn't comply in some fashion, because they still think that Black and brown people are supposed to comply whenever they think we should. And it doesn't matter if you dress as sharp as Mark Harris or if you're as intelligent as Mark Harris. When they see your black skin, they still feel some kind of inferiority upon you and some superiority upon them. And you know what, Kelly? The courts condone it, because what you see in the courts over and over again is the courts doing what I call the intellectual justification of discrimination. And I mean, no matter what the situation, as Mark teaches in class and we come in court, because we see it over and over again, no matter what the situation is, poor people of color in America get the most of injustice and the least of justice. You can give me any kind of equation, and I can tell you that's likely going to be the outcome.
You're watching The Kelly Wright Show. We'll be back with much more of Ben Crump as well as Mark Harris after this. What's the status right now with the Ahmaud Arbery case and the Breonna Taylor cases?
On Ahmaud Arbery, we have the charges against the father and son murderous duo who committed that lynching that we actually saw on our eyes with video. And then we have quite literally the arrest of the third person who I think was part of the lynch mob, and that was William Rowdy Brown, who was videotaping and following them. And then on Breonna Taylor's case, they dropped the charges against her boyfriend on attempted murder. The police chief resigned. Now we're for them to charge those police officers for killing and executing this innocent Black woman in her own apartment.
Before you go, Ben, tell us what inspired you to become the attorney that you are today.
Well, my personal hero is Justice Thurgood Marshall, who, you know, I think all of us stand on his shoulders. Mark Harris, Ben Crump, everybody. So we have to continue to be courageous like Thurgood Marshall and say, even though the Constitution wasn't meant for us Black people, we're American citizens and we're going to make it ours anyway.
Attorneys Ben Crump and Mark Harris, thank you both. Stay in the fight. And you're always welcome on this program. And if I can help in any way, I'm here for you. Thank you both.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you.
So welcome back again. I'm talking to attorney Mark Harris and his colleague, attorney Ben Crump, had to move on to some other matters. But, you know, when we look at this man, Ben Crump, who has given up a lot in order to become who he is today in terms of representing so many people who are forgotten, people who are marginalized, people who are undermined. You're representing the same kind of people, all of us who are people of color. And we're dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic. And yet we find ourselves in an epidemic of systemic hostilities directed towards us. So, Mark, I know you're more than just an attorney, you're an economist, but you're also a man of faith. Where do we get the faith to sustain this and then overcome it and say to the world, we're not doing this anymore?
It's funny you should ask. That's a beautiful question. Both of my sons are lawyers, as you know. One an alumnus of the University of Oregon Law School, the other from the University of San Francisco. I'm a proud father, and their mother's even more proud of them than I am. But we were talking this evening, and I said, you know, I'm tired, son. Part of me is very tired. I've been in the struggle for a long time. The first recollections I have, Kelly, are of the black smoke that billowed from the Watts section of Los Angeles. I grew up in South Central LA. I remember the first Watts riot in 1965. I go back that far. I was very, very young, but it left an indelible mark, an impression on me of oppression by then police chief of Los Angeles, the police chief and the mayor and the National Guard rolling through our neighborhood like we were enemy combatants. So we've been fighting this a long time. Here's what I told my son. I said, as tired as we get, as frustrated as we get, we march on, because those in front of us, those whose shoulders we actually do stand on, had to face even tougher battles than we did under even more dire circumstances. So I get my inspiration from the Lord, and he's never let me down. He never will. I have faith ever growing in terms of an abiding spirit in that regard.
I appreciate you being so candid and open about that and transparent. I want to take a break and come back with more of attorney Mark Harris, as we've just finished talking to his colleague and partner, attorney Ben Crump, about all of the myriad of cases that we're confronted with right now. Back in just a moment with more of attorney Mark Harris. Welcome back to the program. So Mark, in the previous segment, you were talking about faith in God, faith in Jesus Christ to bring you through for you as well as for our community. And you were talking about the riots of 1965. And yes. I know you think that you're older than me, but I remember those riots as well. And I vividly remember the riots of 1968 on the heels of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And there I was, a kid in Washington, D.C., and my mother fleeing Washington, D.C. to go home to be with my grandmother so I wouldn't be witness to the looting, the fires, and the anger that was palpable, understandable, but it violated everything that Dr. King had talked about, and yet it erupted because of the frustration and the hurt and the grief of losing this stalwart of civil rights. So here we are in this day and age on the Black News Channel, and I think if this channel cannot talk about those issues, then, we are, woe to us for not being able to say to Black America and all America, we must be about the business of becoming our brother's keeper, not our brother's killer.
Again, as a man of faith, I could not espouse violence. I could not espouse and embrace killing. It would be inconsistent with what I believe. That's the first thing. But I do believe that we have to protest. You have to protest with vigor. You have to stand strong. Even if your intent is not a violent intent, you can be caught up in violence. I've marched with Black Lives Matter in Sacramento proudly. Luckily, through God's grace, we didn't have significant injury in altercations and interactions with law enforcement as part of those marches, but it could have gone down that way. And we know that every time that we protest on behalf of our people. So there is an undercurrent of violence, sometimes not initiated by us. You've got to be ready to respond. You've got to be ready to defend. The question is whether violence should be your first choice or an initiated choice, and I say it should not. Having said all that, though, the reality of the situation, Kelly, is these are very dangerous times. Young people are very frustrated. They have been told by us that there's a different path, a reasoned path, and they keep seeing these lynchings take place over and over. It's affecting African-American men, African-American women, African-American children. I mean, I've had cases here in Sacramento that would, as my mother would say, uncurl your hair. Yeah. It is absolutely shameful what's happened. The Stephon Clark case I mentioned earlier, we had a situation where a gentleman, Joseph Mann, was shot 17 times by Sacramento PD, and it was just atrocious. They showed up on the scene. Within 30 seconds, they opened fire. They made no attempt to de-escalate, no attempt to get to the bottom. He was unarmed at the time. Dejan Flanaw, another case here in Sacramento, where Mr. Flanaw wound up being stopped by police. The police cam went off for 30 minutes, and when it came back on, he was lying in the street dead. This is not acceptable. So we have to, with everything we have, fight appropriately, but fight very, very hard.
Well, this is why I appreciate you and Ben Crump taking the time out to come on this program and share these insights with us. I will ask you one thing, though, as we continue to look at what's happening in terms of white police officers attacking Black children, men, and women. There's still the specter of Black on Black crime that we have to address as well, because we have to get through that terrible frustration and the killing of each other.
Yes, but you know, we talk about this quite a bit. I have some colleagues at our radio station. You know, I host a weekly radio show here in Sacramento, and I have colleagues at our radio station who are African American who say, I'll start believing and espousing and embracing Black Lives Matter when all Black lives matter, when we diminish and decrease Black on Black crime. I have those on the more progressive end of the spectrum saying that's like blaming the victim. Right. Where you have reasons why Blacks wind up victimizing other African Americans, and there are psychological, sociological, economic. It's re-victimizing the victim. Here's where I come from. All lives do matter, but I'm unapologetically Black, Kelly. I'm Black first. And in my mind, I really want to make sure that those who tune in to the Black News Channel or who tune into the Kelly Wright Show understand that Kelly Wright is an example of how important it is to have a voice, to have a view, to have a perspective, to have an opportunity to express what we believe for us, by us. And I'm very, very proud to support everything that you put your hands to, Kelly Wright, because it empowers our community throughout.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. And I really want to have this kind of show that we can reach out to our young people, our older people, our Black Lives Matter people, all matters. You know, I want everybody to be able to look at this, whether they're Black, brown, white, yellow, purple, I don't really care. I want them to come here and hear a dialogue that has not topical information, but information that digs beneath the headlines to address what the matter of the heart is.
The only place we can do it with candor is on a show like yours. That's why it's so important. You know, before I end, I'd love to do one thing I haven't had a chance to do very often, and that's share my impressions of Benjamin Crump. If you give me a chance to do that before we finish, I sure would like to do that as well.
Do it right now. We'll be back.
I have had the honor and privilege. I have had the honor and privilege of being mentored by some truly great folks. The late Ron Brown, the late Tom Bradley, Yvonne Brathwaite Burke, who was the first African-American woman from Congress to give birth while in Congress, Maxine Waters, and on and on and on. Johnny Cochran, the great Johnny Cochran. We've talked about that before. But I have not seen an attorney with the breadth and depth of experience that Benjamin Crump has, the breadth and depth of what he's taking on by building a national law firm. He has done, in a great level, built a national African-American owned and controlled law firm, which didn't exist in this country before him. Johnny had, before he passed, an attempt to start building that. It wasn't completed during the late Johnny Cochran's lifetime. Benjamin Crump is able to walk with kings and with peasants with equal grace. I have been with Ben all over, and it's amazing to see someone who is as powerful as he is, as eloquent as he is, as committed, as successful as he is, be able to relate to all spectrums, all ethnicities, genders, LGBTQ, everybody he finds a way to relate to. And I'm so proud to be affiliated with Ben Crump's law firm and to count him a colleague and a friend.
That's fantastic. And Mark, we thank you for being on the show, as well as your colleague and your friend and your mentor, Ben Crump. We appreciate you both. We know it's a hard fight out here, and we're all in this fight together, just like we're fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. We've got to stand up and fight and lock arms with each other and embrace each other and strategize on how we can help our young people live the lives that matter to them most. And that's being able to go out and successfully achieve anything they conceive, as long as they keep on believing in that dream. And sad but true, we find that people are trying to take that dream away And as long as I have breath in me, I want to make sure that we are having the kinds of shows that will inspire people, inform them, and will entertain them as well.
I like that. Kelly, thank you. As long as you do those things, I'll be right here with you as long as you'll have me. Thank you so much, both on my behalf and on my colleague Ben Crump's behalf.
Thank you. I love you both. You know that.
Yes.
As well as Mark Harris, thanks for being on the show. The Kelly Wright Show continues after this. Welcome back to the program. So joining me now is President and CEO of the National Newspapers Publishers Association and Black Press USA, Dr. Benjamin Chavis. And Doc, it's good of you to join us today. And certainly as we're watching the protests take place because of the death of George Floyd and other deaths that have taken place, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, the list goes on and on. People are showing their outrage. But as the George Floyd family has stated, as well as attorney Ben Crump, who represents the family, they have wanted everyone to protest, but do it in a non-violent manner. And certainly this is something you know about, having worked with Dr. King.
Yes. Good evening, Kelly. It's good to be back on your program. And certainly the situation in Minneapolis, first, we should not see this as an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern of disrespect, a pattern of racism, a pattern of racial oppression, racially motivated police misconduct, racially motivated police murder. And of course, the outrage is to be expected. I think what we want to see, though, is that we have to channel our anger, channel our pain, channel our outrage into something constructive, not anything destructive. We want to keep the memory of George Floyd alive, his spirit alive, in a positive way. We have to show respect to the Floyd family. And you do that by not engaging in matters like some of the destruction that's going on now in Minneapolis. And there may also be some other loss of life, even in Minneapolis, as people express their rage. So I think that two wrongs don't make a right. We always want to stay on the right path. Yeah, you're right. I did work with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I know the value of nonviolent civil disobedience, nonviolent protest, nonviolent expression of our outrage. The question now is, what can be done? And certainly, particularly to the young people there in Minneapolis and young people around the country, I think that we have to work in a way that gives people not only hope where people can attain their aspirations, but people can work in a way to move this problem forward. I think white America has been too silent on this. It's one thing for Black America to be outraged by what happened, but we need more white American leaders to speak out, not only in Minnesota and Minneapolis, but across these United States of America. This is no time, once again, for Black America to be isolated, alone in our suffering, in our pain, and in our anger.
You know, I asked Attorney Ben Crump if he thought that the statement from President Donald Trump was effective enough, because words do matter. And certainly this is a time that you would want to see, since you're talking about white America speaking out, we are all one America, but in situations like this, we see that we are a divided America. And it seems to me that something should be said from the top down. We've seen it from the state of Minnesota, where the governor has denounced this, where the mayor of Minneapolis has denounced this. In fact, the mayor went so far as to say that walking as a Black man should not be a death sentence. And then we saw former presidential candidate, Senator Amy Klobuchar, call it dehumanizing And so when statements like that come out, you expect it from all sectors of society. And let me be very pointedly here, a statement from Attorney General Keith Ellison on the death of George Floyd. And of course, he is an African American, and he is the Attorney General, a former congressman of Minnesota. And he stated this: George Floyd mattered. Somebody loved him. His life was important. It had value. He lost it in an encounter with law enforcement that once again raises pain and trauma for so many people. And certainly, Doc, we're seeing pain and trauma for so many people, not only in Minneapolis where they're protesting, but also in LA where they've taken to the streets and protest, Memphis where they've taken to the streets to protest. We've seen this before, and we know that it doesn't end well. We have to make sure that in our righteous indignation, it ends right.
Exactly. And again, I understand the anger in Los Angeles, the anger in Memphis, the anger in Baltimore, the anger in New York. It's all across the country. This is an issue for all Black Americans, but as you've stated, it's also an issue for all Americans. And we now have a nation that's divided. We're divided by race, we're divided by politics, we're divided by economics, we're divided by COVID-19, the disproportionate impact. 100,000 Americans more now have lost their lives as a result of COVID-19. And therefore, we need to work to make sure that we bridge some of these divides. And I think that's the time for us to do it, is right now.
The time is right now, and I've talked about this before. Now, your organization, the NNPA Black Press USA, when COVID first started hitting America, you wisely and appropriately launched a coronavirus task force, specifically targeting, or at least specifically warning African Americans and people of color to be prepared for the adverse impacts this would have on our community because of the disproportionality. So now,
absolutely.
So
and,
now that it's reached 100,000, what are the next steps that we have to take?
The NNPA Coronavirus Task Force, as you recall, Kelly, right on your show back in early March, we declared a state of emergency in Black America because of COVID-19. We were not taking it as seriously as we should have been taking it in end of February, beginning of March. The good news is I think that the majority of African Americans now see that this is a very serious pandemic. We have to continue to practice social distancing. We have to continue to keep our hands clean. And we have to continue to avoid situations where there are large crowds. I know most American cities are opening up slowly, but I'm hopeful, even as I saw some of the rage last night in Minneapolis. I saw a lot of brothers and sisters that did not have masks on. Same thing in Los Angeles. I think we have to be careful because while we have an epidemic of white supremacy, we have a pandemic of COVID-19. So our coronavirus task force, we're going to continue to send out alerts almost on a daily basis to better inform Black Americans and others about the dangers of COVID-19. This is going to be with us for a while. It's going to take a long time before they have a vaccine that's effective. So that means we're going to have to move forward in a way, but also protect our health. The greatest wealth is your health. And I think we don't want anyone to lose their lives, certainly from COVID-19. And we don't want anybody to lose their lives from police brutality. So I think we talk about comorbidity. We have a comorbidity problem from police brutality and a comorbidity problem from too much exposure to COVID-19.
Yeah, we have a Herculean task ahead of us, and it really results in, if we fail to do something, it will result in nothing being done. I'm reminded of Dr. King, who said, I'm going to read his quote here: "I've decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear." That love goes deep, it goes wide, and it covers a multitude of sins. And certainly it also is tough love. It addresses a problem. It addresses injustice. and it speaks to it, and then it goes in to correct it.
Exactly.
That's what we have to do.
Exactly. Dr. King's words are still relevant and appertain to the day. No question about it, Kelly. And I just want to, again, salute the Black News Channel, the Kelly Wright Show, and of course, BlackPressUSA.com with the National Newspaper Publishers Association. We're going to continue to get the word out. We're going to continue to not only keep our people informed, but we have to be advocates of equal justice, advocates of racial justice, advocates of making the quality of life in our community better. So, you know, I don't want us to get pessimistic. I don't want us to get frustrated. And I certainly don't want us to start engaging in self-destruction because of the outrage. To me, we should channel our outrage into a positive, nonviolent, constructive modus operandi that affects long-term social change, long-term progress for Black Americans and for all people.
Well said, because the world is watching. They're watching to see how we will deal with not only COVID-19, but these atrocities that have been taking place on a racial, basically showing our systemic racism. I'm getting calls from London, from Africa about what's happening in America. So you're right. We do have to take every full measure to right wrongs and get our lives in order as we deal with COVID-19 and the epidemic of violence. Dr. Benjamin Chavis, thanks for being on the program today. And I hope that you will stay safe and stay well.
Thank you. God bless.
All right. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. And now for my final word. At the top of the hour, I talked about how a nation divided against itself cannot stand. We must remember what Attorney Ben Crump stated about the Declaration of Independence, the words written by Thomas Jefferson, who stated this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That means every American has a God-given right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because, my friends, we are one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I hope you've been righted, ignited, and united to keep spreading justice, knowledge, love, freedom, and peace. Good night.
This kind of living ain't right. In times like these, do you ever wonder? We need a savior. In times like these, do you ever wonder?